Well, today I am really excited to get a chance to speak with Jared Loman, who is the head of operations and CX at Kick, which is an accounting automation tool. So, Jared, thank you for carving out time to speak with our audience about your experience in CX.
Yeah, thanks for the invite. I was excited to reconnect with you after what, 3, 4 years. So yeah, glad to be here.
Yeah, for our audience, little surprise there, but I'm really excited to speak with Jared because we worked together in the past, and of course, really excited to dig in there. But we have, just a pro on here. His experience spans leading CX at multiple tech companies, so I know Jared, you are going to have some awesome insight. So let's go ahead and dig in. At Kajabi, where we work together, you oversaw customer experience during a really, really significant growth period for the organization. So I wanted to start us off by asking, what are your best recommendations for scaling CX teams without compromising the quality of service?
Yeah, so first of all, just to set the picture here, I am about 6 to 8 months into my role at Kajabi, and I end up taking over the role of VP of Customer Experience. So I have a little bit of context on the company, but not a lot of context on what's happening across the entirety of CX. We are at a place to where, so to set the additional setting here, we've got a company that's 6 years old-ish, 7 years old, um, and about 20 to 30-ish people spread throughout the globe working in CX. And when I go to start like digging into things and seeing what's up, because that's usually the first step is like you have to figure out what's going on. I have an entrepreneurial background. I want to know what's happening before I start taking some action and shifting things. So as I start digging in, I realize that we have almost no data. Like we have a very, very vanilla install of our support tool. We have CSAT, and that is it. Um, so you can imagine the way I felt when literally a week after I take over this role, we see a 40% month over month growth. And this is actually just the beginning. It continues on from there. Um, we were clearly not equipped. We were not set up to take on the amount of growth that we saw even in that month. And so I really started my position operating off the back of my heels. Um, this was about 2 months prior to the global pandemic. Obviously, we all remember that, which for many industries, not so great for a knowledge content creator type industry. It was a season of massive growth. So on the back of that 40% month over month growth, we continued to see, growth in the hundreds of percents on a month over month basis in terms of our ticket volume. And this is all while just getting started. So jumping into this, like in terms of not compromising that quality, like for us, like if I could do this all over again, it's getting that data in place as quickly as possible, making sure that you know your numbers and making sure that you have a solid handle on where you need to deploy resources, how many resources you have to deploy, and and I think from there, like that's the first step to actually figuring out like how to actually solve some of the customer problems that you're going to encounter, because without those numbers, you're pretty much operating in the dark.
Right, that is huge. If you don't have the tech in place and you don't have the data in place, then you have to be reactive rather than proactive. So, really huge and great recommendation. And I think even if organizations have, a pretty good tech stack or data stack, there's always room for improvement or tweaks or optimizations. Well, Kajabi as an organization was one of the first to serve a new niche, which, as you mentioned, is online knowledge content creators. And so I'm wondering, what are some of the lessons that you've learned about designing a CX strategy tailored to these niche audiences rather than like a general consumer?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really comes down to three things. First one is there is no one size fits all approach. Moving from content creation to now, as we mentioned earlier, like the bookkeeping and accounting space, two industries that are each uniquely approached from a CX perspective. In the bookkeeping and accounting world, you're dealing with people who are more interested in like very, very specific financial related information related to how they operate their business. Whereas in the content creation space, the span of scope that we needed to cover was everything from, oh my goodness, how do I actually start this business? I just quit my job. What do I do next? To, I have this in-depth technical problem due to an API integration from some third party tool. And the reality of this is like as in that point in time, like rewinding back to pandemic era, AI is in its infancy. Like today, we're surrounded by a ton of different tools and offerings, certainly much more advanced than they were at that point in time. But it was really designed to answer short, very, very transactional questions at that point. Um, and so, like the first learning for me was like there is no just magical approach to or one size fits all approach to solving a problem. Like you really have to know your audience and understand where those pain points are for them. So some of like the more practical things that we actually did, which kind of carries on from the previous question of how do we scale a CX org during seasons of rapid growth. One of the things that we did during that time was we realized that there was a major sticking point for people who are just starting out on the platform. Not entirely uncommon. Obviously, the first few steps are going to be the hardest. But in particular, with Kajabi, you have a group of people who are starting a business, in particular, a group of people that probably have never ran businesses before. So one of the more tactical things that we did in this space, because we took the time to learn and know and understand our audience, was we redeployed many of our resources, which were small at that time, to conducting live calls. We said like, hey, we can get, and this was mainly just reacting to the fact that we were growing hand over fist every day and we couldn't respond quick enough. So we needed a way to bring people in, answer their questions, but also meet them where they were at. And so by learning and knowing the audience, and really the third thing is like understanding the customer journey, which kind of helps you actually know and understand your audience, knowing what the steps are that they take to get from point A to B when using your product or service. How do they get to that outcome? Really helps you focus on defining a strategy that's going to be most applicable to them. So yeah, I think again, just it's knowing your audience. It's understanding that like you're probably, even if you've had a previous job in the space, you're probably not going to have this playbook that's just going to work perfectly if you're in an entirely different industry or space. And yeah, following that customer journey.
Yeah, I love what you said about the playbook, and that can even change for an organization, especially something in like the B2B world or anything where they're offering new products or services. Those touch points are going to change. I remember at Kajabi, we worked on the next best actions, and it was what are the things that if people do these things, they're more likely to stick around and succeed with the product or service. They're more likely to get their business off the ground. And I remember that was one of the projects that I know CX and the marketing team worked on together and trying to figure out what does it take for someone to stick around, and then how can we educate folks on what they need to do to see that success. And then it's that nice win-win. I feel like I say win-win in every one of these calls, but I'm really all about that, truly, genuinely. And I think that is really key. And it's important to keep in mind, especially if there are CX leaders that have been with an organization for many years, like that playbook will likely change over time as new products or services come in or others get sunsetted. So really love your perspective there. And you're right, there is no one size fits all.
Yeah, I love the win-wins too. Like that is the root of every successful business is a win for the customer and a win for the business.
Yeah. So then now chatting about Kick, the organization that you're with now, it's focused on the automation of accounting. And, that's a complicated and it's a critical area of the business, but it's perhaps a little like unglamorous and maybe something that people don't like really get excited about thinking about. So, what are your goals and priorities when you're trying to deliver a great customer experience with a tool that's meeting a business need, but it's not something that people get like really excited about? They're not getting necessarily like the warm and fuzzies from accounting software, but it's pretty dang important. So, if you could speak to that, I am so curious.
I love the question. You hit the nail on the head. There is nothing glamorous about accounting or bookkeeping, but realistically, we're trying to change that, and we're trying to change that on all fronts. The first level of this is actually maybe a little less CX, but more focused on the product itself. Um, One of my favorite quotes, which I will completely and absolutely butcher, is something to the nature. One of our customers said that Kick is like the Apple of bookkeeping, where essentially we offer a very, very polished product that makes the bookkeeping experience for the small business owner, uh, dare I say, delightful experience. And I actually come at that from the perspective of being a small business owner myself. Spent the first decade of my career running my own business, feeling these pain points very, very, very close to home. In terms of the problems that we're solving. So back to the root of your question in terms of what are some of the goals. So with Kick from a customer experience perspective, our customers come to us with very personal questions. Like they're usually actually not questions around the product like you might find in a traditional SaaS situation. Like the product's actually pretty simple, intuitive. We do get a few product questions, but most of the questions they ask are going to be something that's very personal to them. And one of the things that is actually broadly applicable to anyone in the CX space here, and one of the things that, at least in my journey, that I've seen missing most when it comes to tooling, is that agents are very, very frequently missing context. When you're going in to provide an answer to a customer, you don't have the information you need at your disposal to effectively and quickly respond to the needs of the customer. So, my goals at Kick are really to eliminate those problems. It's to have not only a very personalized experience for that customer because they're asking things that are very, very context specific. Like you can't answer a question about someone's books unless you have context on their books. But also from a product standpoint, we need to know the things that even, with tons of resources at my previous role at Kajabi, like really investing into the systems. Like my goal here is to do that on another level to make sure that anytime a question is being answered, that the person answering it has the necessary context to provide an incredible experience because it's a combination of those things that is the perfect recipe for success on a customer experience level. It's that the agent's able to respond quickly and effectively, and the customer really gets a great response that's not just another push you aside and move on to the next ticket.
That's huge. I took accounting recently as part of my MBA, and it was really challenging. And, we were doing it over Excel to try to just learn the basics. And I was realizing like how complicated and complex that field is. And as a small business owner, that, many people don't have that training. And, they turn to a tool like Kick or, maybe one of the others in the industry. And it's not easy to do, and they are going to have questions and they are going to be more advanced than some other services that the questions may be a little bit more automatable, one might say. So I really love that you're focused on personalization. I think we all know that that's where CX is heading, as we're going to have automation tools to handle like the easy questions, so to speak. The role of the CX agent is going to be focused on providing that tailored support, especially when it comes to like B2B tools. That's just where we're headed. So love that you're seeing that and excited to see, how you're able to pull that off because that context is so, so important. So very, very cool things in the work there. So then taking it a little bit more general about your experience at different tech companies, I'm wondering how you ensure that customer experience teams are collaborating effectively with like product and engineering, because that's so critical when you are working in CX at a business tool, like you just mentioned, building in things like that context and all of that. So wondering how you can foster that alignment between departments.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think that that is the role of CX. Like, If you sell a product like CX is the front line, they are the voice of the customer. They understand, and granted, they are also have a backwards facing bias. But they are the first people to hear when something goes wrong with the product. They are the first people to have a true understanding of what the customer actually needs, not just what they say they need. Due to the interactions that they're having, they're speaking with customers who are actively using your product. So, in order to facilitate those relationships, I kind of, I approach this maybe a little bit different than most because I actually have an engineering background. I'll call myself a script kiddie. I won't call myself an engineer. Um, but have a at least a good understanding of the tech, how it works. And so one of the first things that I did at Kajabi was I actually established a role. We called it the tech lead. I didn't know that that was actually even a role. We just made up the name, but that person was intended to be the ultimate SME. It was the person who knew and could speak both the tech language as well as the customer language. And I would say that over the course of the years, that role proved to really be an incredibly critical role, like in terms of facilitating and fostering those relationships. Um, Ultimately, what that resulted in is there was always a clean channel for various customer issues to work their way from the customer reporting it onto the engineering team who may be troubleshooting and triaging the issues. Now, of course, there's always going to be additional challenges as you grow and scale in terms of just facilitating that process. V1 for us was just a Slack channel. We had the person who said, "Hey, I've got something," and that person who was able to communicate effectively with the engineering teams was the person who was helping facilitate the triaging and the debugging. And ultimately, what that results in is a really strong relationship amongst teams. I also, interestingly, found one of the most challenging relationships, and this may be due to my personal bias, was actually the CX marketing connection. That was probably one of the most interesting relationships to facilitate because you can imagine in the world where marketing's sending out communications and drawing people in, um, who actually responds to those? It's usually the CX team that are responding to the communications. And so, one of the learnings for me over the course of the years was is actually to really invest there. It was something that I didn't do. I was over focused on the product and engineering relationship, and maybe as a result, kind of let that marketing CX relationship slide. But that's another incredibly critical relationship that needs to have very, very strong ties to be effective.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially marketing, they're talking about the product, they're talking about the service, and some marketers are going to have a better understanding of the product or service than others. And sometimes they only need the kind of a service level to be able to speak to it. They're not selling it on demos and they're not providing support. And so it is really important to have that kind of deeper understanding and foster that collaboration between those teams because you don't want to set any, potential customers up for disappointment if they misunderstood what the product could or couldn't do or how easy something is or was not to use. So that's really interesting, but makes a lot of great points. And I love that your background, references some of that deep technical skill that CX is a role that having other experience can help make you more effective at it. And it's so important to really understand the product or service that you're selling if you're going to be responsible for making people happy using it. So you mentioned a couple times things that were kind of like low tech, low lift, things like a Slack channel or just having calls to address customer needs. I think in our kind of high tech society, it feels like there needs to be a high tech solution for everything, but very often just getting things off the ground, it's a Zoom call. It's a Slack channel. If you're in person, walking over to someone's desk and just chatting it out. Sometimes we overcomplicate things, and keeping it simple can help really focus on the problem at hand. And then you can scale up the solutions as needed to foster that work and that collaboration. But sometimes just keeping it simple is all you really need to get at the heart of the problem.
Yes, I agree completely.
So, lastly, I know that you co-founded an organization yourself, and that's going to give you a really unique perspective as a leader. So, how does your experience as a co-founder shape how you approach the customer experience?
First of all, I think you teed it up perfectly when talking about just the scrappiness of getting the job done. So I would say more than anything, like in my experience as a co-founder, was really a lot of lessons learned. More than anything, like ultimately, my company ended up failing after about a year and a half, and so like in the end, it was a plethora of wonderful learnings that have helped me both in big companies, small companies, in between. But like I would really summarize them all into get the job done as quickly as possible before you overbuild. I've made the mistake, probably due to my engineering background, of trying to over-engineer a solution ad infinitum. And the reality of it is you can do that um, pretty much endlessly, but you're only going to see meaningful results for the first, maybe 20% of that journey. So that co-founder experience uh, really helped me learn like you have to get something out there. You have to get something done. And usually the way to do that is just get the quickest thing done. It's usually not the best thing. It's get the quickest thing in place, build and iterate. And over time, you're ultimately going to get to the right solutions. As you know, we talked about earlier with that tech lead role. Didn't know what it was going to be. I didn't know what that, 5 years down the road that it would be a team of 15 people, all people that ultimately actually became the new farm team for engineering and other roles throughout the company. Um, but the reality of it is we needed to get something going. And so I think for me, it really helps me understand that I just need to actually take some action, have that bias for action, get the rough draft on the table, and start working with it as quickly as possible.
I think that makes a lot of sense that getting something out the door is just the most important thing. Keeping it simple. You can always improve upon it later, as you mentioned, if something proves out to be successful or worth the time invested. But I think that's really helpful, especially for people who've either always worked at bigger companies that can move a little bit more slowly, bring in that sort of action, or people who haven't ever been in sort of an entrepreneurial role that, bringing that energy into it can be sometimes what the team just really needs. So, really love that. Thank you so much, Jared, for taking time to share your experience with all of us today. I hope they've got some great new perspective.
Yeah, I hope there was something helpful in there for someone out there listening.
I'm sure there was. Thank you to our listeners for taking time to tune in, and we will see you next time.